Welcome to Conversations with Barbara. I'm Barbara Kanellopoulos, and our conversation today is about restorative justice. It's a concept that has gained widespread attention, and our panel today, they are here to help us understand exactly what restorative justice is all about. Thank you so much for joining us. And let's start right out with introductions, self-introductions. Let's have each one of you introduce yourself to our viewers.
Two Paulas. So
Oh, yes.
I'm
So,
Paula B, and Paula P will speak also.
yes.
I am Paula Pace.
Yes.
Joanne Triestman.
Yes.
Marilyn Hajer.
Brenda Nolan.
Good. Well, then, let's start out with a sort of working definition of restorative justice. What, for those viewers and for myself too, what is this? Paula?
Yes. At its core, restorative justice is about relationship, building, maintaining, and strengthening relationships. And through relationships, we create resilient communities. So it's also about community building and community healing when harm happens in the community. It's really a different mindset, and it's a way of thinking about things that's not our usual. And as we talk about it, you'll get more of a sense of what it looks like when we apply the principles to our practice.
I see. So that it's about relationships. So then let us look at what a relationship might be. Someone has injured someone else. How does restorative justice change that relationship from one of, say, punishment?
We can talk about, Barbara, we can talk about the classroom. Many of us have spent time in classrooms, and you know that getting sent to the principal and sometimes even being suspended can be an outcome. I was introduced to restorative justice, it was from the 70s, where I went to a workshop on how to help children resolve conflict. And it really brought to my mind a whole new way of thinking about having children solve their own problems and having them listen to one another. And so you would create in your classroom what's called a peace table, and the teacher could initiate it, but eventually the children would learn to do it themselves. There was a conflict over materials, or someone said something or did something, the children sit at the peace table and they listen to each other. They talk to each other. And they keep going back and forth, listening, not interrupting, not accusing. And in the end, the teacher says, have you heard everything you want to hear? Have you said everything you want to say? And they agree, they can shake hands, they can hug. And I saw that and thought, this is something really fascinating, a way to solve these kinds of problems. So then I came to a workshop in Falmouth, the library, a few years ago, and Brenda was presenting a panel on restorative justice. And that's how I got involved and learned about it.
I see. That seems to be really an important part of what education is all about. So I would imagine that making room in the classroom for that sort of thing would be really help young people understand lots about human behavior. So so how would this apply in, say, a community outside of the classroom, or is it applicable outside of the small scenes like classrooms? Does it have a wider application?
Well, I can talk about where I used it. 2 years ago, I discovered that my road, Agassiz Road in Woods Hole, was named after a white supremacist. And I decided I've got to change the name of this road. I can't live with this. I brought the idea to a neighborhood association. And there was some very strong opposition because he was a well-known scientist. And so I suggested, how about we have a conversation circle, and I'll make it happen. And so with a group of people, we put up signs around, and I rented the community hall. And on the date, and I had no idea who was going to come, 50 people showed up. And this is for a little road of 7 residences. So I used a circle process, which is something that is used by in restorative justice practices. Used a talking piece so that people who were holding the talking piece were the only ones allowed, the only person allowed to speak was the person holding the talking piece, and everyone else listened. And in the beginning, I heard this afterwards, there were people who were like, oh my gosh, this feels like kindergarten. But by the end, people really shared their perceptions and their perspectives and listened to each other, and sort of ringing out was, this is what democracy looks like. So it was really an opportunity to take an issue that where there were different feelings and strong feelings, and bring it to a community and allow the community an opportunity to explore it and to really hear each other.
That's so interesting, and I can see that maybe others, as I have thought about it, as a kind of substitute for criminal justice. I can see how far off I was in my thinking. It really is a way of being with others and solving problems that it's widely applicable, but I need to hear more. It seems to me that one must, Paula, does one need a lot of training to be able to accomplish this?
There is a lot of training that goes into this, and it is not anything that a person in a community could not do. So it just takes an interest. And the 5 of us learned how to hold circles. We learned how to do that in a space as well as online because of COVID. And as a result, we were able to actually reach a lot more people. We hold a community circle in our area twice a month, where we sit and talk on a topic deeply. Everyone gets a chance to share. If you don't want to speak, you can pass, but it is a circle. So we each pass our to the other. Very democratic. Everyone is equal. And we found that at one point there was an interest in our community on talking about race. So we actually, being 5 white women, felt we really weren't equipped to hold a circle on race. And we contracted with somebody who is well known in the field for working in schools and he gave us a conversation base called How to Have Difficult Conversations with People Who Are Different from You in Order to Heal. We had reached out to our community. We got 22 people, and it was over the course of 2 sessions, 2 hours each. And we really very quickly formed a community of people, strangers, around this issue. And we learned to have compassion for the person who had been harmed and the person who was the harmer. We had a very good response to it.
Well, so that I'll turn to Brenda for instruction. Then is what you do on Zoom open to anybody who may want to learn how to go about this? Are they sort of demonstrations that you do, or are these private gatherings?
At the moment, we are inviting people that we know, because we don't want to put anyone in a situation where they might experience trauma and not have support. So basically, we're going out to create community around us.
I see. Well, then, others, perhaps others who are curious about this, are there textbooks, are there articles that one can read and understand even more? I think that, so it's so easy to think that restorative justice is about, say, a justice, bringing justice to courts, for example. This doesn't apply to courtrooms, apparently. It doesn't take the place of the legal system.
No, it does not. Restorative justice is an option that hopefully people have available to them. It's not widely available.
I see. I see. So it's the kind of experience that one can privately enter into. Yes, I can see that perhaps somebody who has had some offenses can seek out the individuals to have this kind of conversation to yes, restore. So it's not necessarily restoring justice, but restoring relationships. I see.
Yes.
Yeah, I can understand why you said, many of you said earlier, that a simple definition isn't going to cover it. This is really very, very deep. Now, Marilyn suggested that this has ancient roots. Restorative justice is nothing new. Is that so?
That is true. The roots of restorative justice are very, very old and common in indigenous cultures all over the world, really. You know, the value of sitting together, the value of community, you know, the value of honoring shared humanity and in the planet, on the earth, from the earth. People have been gathering in these ways since ancient times. Modern restorative justice, my understanding is, has been around, or what's called modern restorative justice, since the 1970s. And it's been around in the schools since then. These practices, you can take any place. They're totally applicable in one's family. You know, any place where people sit together, honoring each other, the dignity and the humanity in each other, becomes healing and restorative.
I suspect that that this has to do with one's use of language, that there are ways to say things and ways not to say things. Is there some publications that might help somebody? I myself am very eager to read more about this and learn particularly about some model languages that further persons toward understanding rather than away. I'm thinking of our present moment in this country where we are so divided and we so desperately need some ways to come together. Is there a possibility when there's political division? I'll go back to Paula when you had your meeting about changing the name of your street. That was somewhat political.
Yes. And I think it is. I mean, I think it's a way for people to come together with different perspectives and to hear each other, because the big problem is that people can't listen to each other. They just want to talk. And this creates a process which sort of slows down the conversation and allows people to hear what the other person is seeing. And it may not result in agreement, but it can result in understanding.
Understanding, yes, this seems to me has a great potential. Brenda, I had asked earlier about whether or not there is a manual. Is there something like that?
There are some books that were written by Kay Pranis and Carolyn Boyce Watson, manuals that were developed for use in the classroom that are useful. There's also a book called Return to the Teachings by Rupert Ross. And it's one of my favorite books because it talks about how in a place called Hollow Water in Canada, they started to use these processes, restorative processes, indigenous processes, because they were did not like how they were being treated in the criminal legal system. And it's pretty amazing to read that book. Gets to the heart and the spirit. I cried when I read it and really got a huge idea of what restorative justice is and its potential. You mentioned also about the political system, and which brings to mind that often it's the questions that are asked that are really important. So if people are arguing in their families about, or having difficulty in the relationships in their families around having different political views or religious views, one of the questions that can be asked is, what is it like for you that you and I have such different views? And that's a conversation that can bring people together and honor their relationship.
So what is it like for you? How do you feel about my disagreeing with you? Is that what you mean?
How is it that we don't have agreement around our political views and they seem to separate us? And how is it for you that we have these disagreements?
I see. I see.
So we talk about how we feel, how we're feeling, how sad we are that we have the disconnection around these views and how we want to be connected. So it changes the conversation.
Yes, I can see that. We're not just focusing on the disagreement, we're focusing on our selves and the feelings of those selves.
And our relationship.
And the relationship, yes, yes. So many people think that they can preserve the relationship by simply not talking about certain topics. So that we have always heard, oh, we don't discuss religion, we don't discuss politics, but that's sort of, what do we call it, the elephant in the room, right? And this, it seems to me that this process really is I can see why it would be healing. The name of that book, perhaps we can get that up on the screen so that people can may want to check our library to see if it's available. What is the name of that again?
Rupert Ross, and it's Returning to the Teachings.
Returning to the Teachings.
And there's more to that name, but that's basically the name.
Good, good.
There's also the little book of restorative, the little book of circle process. And a really great book right now that was just written by Fania Davis is about race and restorative justice. This is the little book of restorative justice by Howard Zehr.
Oh,
That's a really good book to start with.
I see. So I would imagine that if one went to the library's website and just checked out restorative justice, there might be a number of titles. But Joanne, I want to go back to your experiences in the classroom. What about the complaint that some teachers have that there isn't time in the course of, say, 50 minutes if you've got to teach the multiplication tables? What's your answer to that?
Well, as I was explaining, the goal is to help children learn what the trigger is. It's kind of, and it's reminding me of what they're doing with Calmer Choice, is helping students be aware of how they're feeling and having them self-monitor, but also say, this is a time when I need to do X or Y. The teacher does not have to be involved once they've learned the system of doing it. So then they just say, peace table, 10 minutes, whatever, so that they can then go and resolve it. Does not take time away from the instruction or during, during break time or snack time, so that people know, the children know that they're going to be responded to, that someone's going to address what's going on. And it gives them a certain amount of empowerment. I mean, one of the things that we talk a lot about, why we're doing this, is that we want to reflect our humanity. And, winning and losing is not important. It's how you treat other people.
Yes, and I can think about times when I was a teacher, if that routine starts early in the year,
Right.
it becomes second nature perhaps to the children, and they
Automatic, right? It becomes
automatic, right? And I'll turn to Paula for some other situations when restorative justice practices are applicable besides the classroom. Certainly family situations. I'm concerned also about what Paula talked about with when people are divided politically. We're seeing this right at this moment. Any thoughts about that?
I'm sorry, I think Brenda had spoken to this in families, right? There's a lot of work being done in society right now on racial injustice. That's a very big topic for us right now. And I think groups all over Falmouth are working on this in any way they can. So just being able to sit with people who have differing views from you and being able to see the humanity in them and not immediately go to, I'm right, you're wrong, but open up a space for, hearing each other's perspective and coming to see through their lens what's important to them. That, sometimes we see that what's important to us is the very same thing that we both are striving for, and something can open up from that.
I see. The situation that we're facing right now, where we're with our election, is that seems to me, is that an area where this might help, where we have people believing one thing and others believing another, believing, for example, that we've had a fair election and others feel that say that it's no, it's not. That's what we're facing right at this very moment. Can you see a way where a conversation of this sort, well, I think you have said that it may not change opinions, but what would it accomplish then?
I think, Barbara, that bringing the temperature down, having people sit and find some commonality. What is it that you want to see in our community? Make it more of a local, person to person, neighbor to neighbor kind of conversation, as opposed, sometimes we just have to block out the enormity of what's going on and make it a person to person. What is it that you like about our town? Find some commonality and respect. I mean, you're going to respect me and I'm going to respect you, and we're going to listen, and we may not agree, but that doesn't mean that we can't say hi to each other on the street. It doesn't mean that we have to be angry. And so that's how I see it. I'm sure other people have comments. We all have opinions. So we go back and forth.
Good. Yes. I'm beginning to understand what you're saying. I think Paula started out by talking about, and I'm trying to remember this, relationships, that you don't change minds, but you preserve a relationship, which would be so important in families. I know families where they are divided because one's cousin believes one thing and brother-in-law believes another, and it's been very tough, seriously tough. So I see. Does anybody have some other ideas about that? How that can how that can work today, even when people are divided politically.
I do. I was thinking when you were asking for books, that Marshall Rosenberg wrote a very important book about nonviolent communication. And it's very much a part of our process and belief system. And it speaks to the importance, which has already been mentioned, of really deep listening and being able to take what you've heard and reflect it back to the other person. So the other person gets to feel valued and actually heard. If you can repeat back to the other person what they just said to you, I think, it deepens the conversation, and particularly to developing the skill of listening for what's underneath the words that people say. And usually underneath the words that people say lives an unmet need. And if you can really hear that, then you can respond to the other person from a more heart-centered place.
Mm-hmm.
And usually, people, if we stay on the surface and just listen to people's words, it's pretty easy to feel and be oppositional. But if you listen underneath for what people, the unexpressed need, what's really under there, what's the person really feeling, what's going on inside that person, and you come from a place of awareness around shared humanity, it's much easier to find a common heart connection. Not always easy,
Mm-hmm.
but easier.
I had an experience like that a couple of years ago. There was a demonstration on the Falmouth Green around the kids that were coming up from the border and possibly being housed on the Cape. And I went in support of that. And across the street were people who were demonstrating against it. And I just said, I'm going to go talk to those people. So I walked over and I just said, I know that you care about things the way I do. And it's just like totally disarmed. I mean, we were singing songs together and it didn't change opinions, but it was, they needed to be heard. They needed to be seen in their full humanity, and they weren't being by the people that were demonstrating.
Yes, I can see that this is really quite profound, and Marilyn, what you've said is interesting, because so much of what we learn to do is using language is what is oppositional, as you said. At the media, social media, news, we tend to think in terms of opposition, not in the way you've described and the way Paula has described, with language that gets to the heart of who we are and how we care for each other. So this really opens up, I think, lots of possibilities for having us live more humanely, I think. I was thinking about how through history, we've always not agreed in this country. You read American history, there have been times of real disagreement. So maybe the disagreement is not the thing that we should approach. I'm beginning to understand from what you're saying that what we need to work on is our common humanity in spite of those disagreements. And am I getting close to the idea?
Yes. And a core aspect of restorative justice are the values: courage, empathy, listening, love. I mean, all the values that we share as common human beings. So that's an essential part. And it's often the way a circle can start with people saying what value they want to bring to it. And then it becomes a shared value of all the people in the circle.
I wonder if this would lend itself to, say, doing community circles, maybe meeting at the library if somebody invite somebody who disagrees with you or to meet, so that that might just work. I'm thinking if it works in small groups, it might work with larger ones. We may just need that kind of healing as we go into 2021. If we have no idea what's going to happen. So this, I think, is really extraordinary. And to think that it has been around for years, and yet it has not, but it's not commonly thought about. I had no idea. I thought restorative justice was something really that was something having to do with changing our legal system. But I see now that it's something that every human being in Falmouth can use in his or her own life. Right. So those, I think it might be worthwhile. Marilyn, that book that you spoke about, I wonder if that's available at the library for anyone who wants to find it. Yeah.
Sure.
Right. I think maybe what we can do, if it's possible, before this program is ended, to just have a screen with a short bibliography. I can, of some readings that might help people. So I will collect those and see, have them posted, perhaps at the end of this program. And so let me then turn again to Brenda. This seems to me that restorative justice is something you've been working with for a long time. Was it your reading that got you started, or was it some individuals?
It was driving my school buses.
Really?
I saw how differently kids were treated for the same behaviors, which broke my heart at the time. And so there was a lot, I did a lot of reading and thinking about it, found books by Jane Nelson, and I think Developing Capable People at the time, and coming up with ideas of asking questions like, I want you to say sitting in your seat, but tell me what happened. So asking the question and hearing what happened. And as Marilyn said, going for the values. So you wanted respect for your mother when, that's why I socked you when you called my mother a whore, or something like that. And it made such a difference. And the buses got mellow when I didn't focus on punishment, but I focused on what it was that I needed to drive the bus safely for the kids to be safe. And so that was my beginning of realizing that the way I had been taught to think about punishment and so forth was not working. And so focusing on what was really important was the way to go. And that was my beginning.
Well, yeah, certainly if it has applications for a bus driver driving school children, it certainly would be applied almost anywhere. And to go, does anyone have some additional thoughts about applying this, what seems to be a way of talking to each other, where it might be applied?
I'd just like to add to what Brenda was saying in terms of kids on the school bus. And you mentioned right at the beginning, restorative justice in a classroom. And I just wanted to add that restorative justice, that an entire school system can become a restorative community. And there's a wonderful example of school systems in New York City where Matthew Gilden who wasn't even a restorative justice person. He was a teacher, long-term teacher in the schools, became dean, developed a program that he called the 100% Respect Campaign. And that meant that in the entire system, there was going to be 100% respect for 100% of the people, 100% of the time. And it was entirely values-based. You know, what did respect mean to every person, from the person who drove the bus to the superintendent? Everybody had a voice in defining what respect meant to them. And it was personal understanding of it. It was discussed in the classroom. It was discussed grade-wise, all the way up to a town hall where a shared vision of what respect was and shared behaviors. You know, what would it mean to be respectful or receive respect from a teacher to a child, staff to staff, student to student, you know, all the way around. You know, what would those behaviors look like? What guidelines would you need to follow in terms of behaviors? You know, what would I need from a teacher to a student? What would a student need to show respect to a teacher? It just was fully encompassed the entire school, including what will we do as a community if these values and norms are violated, and a school-wide agreement about what those responses would be. And they'd be in the world of restorative justice, you know, sitting together and talk, all the things that people have been mentioning, sitting together in a circle to work through the harm, the accountability. Everybody was equally accountable, equally responsible. And there's a range of restorative practices to address, you know, any kind of violation of the definition of respect. And pieces of that, I think, can be applied to any group, any organization, wherever there are people who really are open and willing to be vulnerable and authentic and willing to see the dignity in everybody.
It strikes me that from what you're saying and from what others have said, that about its use in the classroom, so much of what children learn has nothing to do with the curriculum. And yet, if early on these attitudes are fostered, why then individuals could take this with them for the rest of their lives. I would imagine this would be why so would be important to begin it, to have it in schools. I think that other programs really don't focus that much on the language we use with each other. So it seems to me this is something that ought to be introduced in all classrooms. Do you think that it has? Do we know, Brenda, rather Joanne, do you know of school systems that have consciously applied issues besides restorative justice, besides this, the one in New York?
Sometimes it's individual teachers or individual groups. A lot of this started in early childhood, where you can, begin with young children and move it forward. And as I was saying, I think that the Commerce Choice program here in Falmouth lends itself to expand possibly to, being able to listen to each other along with calming yourself. And a few of us in this group have had experiences in the community working with community groups that have conflicts. Some of us in our religious groups, getting, the coffee hour, somebody looked at somebody the wrong way and they're upset, getting that together. I mean, those are things that we've already been doing and feeling pretty much like we make a difference. So I think you know, it's a possibility almost any place. I think somebody had mentioned about a Canadian program. Was that Marilyn that you were talking about, a program in Canada that there was a school that used the restorative practices?
No, I don't know about that, but I know that there are many, many schools across the country that are becoming fully restorative. Because
Really?
you can have, and I actually heard somebody principal talking about this not too long ago, that within her school, there were classrooms that were, you know, that were very progressively involved in restorative practices and very successful. And yet, when the student walked outside, and not just the student, when you walked outside the classroom into the hallways, the environment was very different. And when it came to being disciplined, right, for wrongdoing, it was very different than what was going on in the classroom. And so for these practices to really work, which they seem to in the example that I gave you, I think within 2 years, the suspension rate went down 51%. Academics rose, behaviors of children were, you know, there was so much less disruption. But it makes a difference if everybody buys in and everybody is accountable. If a student can see a teacher say, I made a mistake, I'm sorry. You know, if the student can see a teacher own his or her own behavior, it makes it much easier for the student to, you know, I mean, there's a modeling that goes on. So and it's not very easy to change systems. I mean, we all know. But there are systems that we know quite a bit, all of us, about the school system in Oakland, California. There's a fellow who's going to be coming from Connecticut, who's a restorative justice person in the New Haven area, who's worked with schools and helped them become fully restorative. You know, I mean, it's there, but it takes a huge investment. It's a huge investment in the system of time, which, as Paul had said earlier, people don't feel there's nearly enough time. And to me, it seems as if, particularly now, you know, living through and with COVID, the level of trauma that kids are carrying, teachers, all of us, but I'm thinking particularly of kids right now, that when you're traumatized, as you know, when the bottom falls out of your world and school isn't what it used to be, it isn't even there, you know, and then you're thinking of re-entering. I think a common response to trauma is fight, flight, you know, or freeze. And none of those are conducive to taking in new information and learning. So it seems like more than ever, it's important to find the time that isn't there to address these things in order for kids to be able to be free, to breathe freely and to take in information and to be curious, you know, and to explore the impact of trauma, you know, and even before COVID, kids, you know, came to school in the morning, having had hard times before they came in. They might not have been able to have breakfast. There might not have been food for breakfast. Their parents may have had a fight. So being informed about trauma is a big piece of the healing process and what's important, the learning process in schools. And this is happening in a lot of systems more and more.
That's very encouraging. It may be that this is an idea whose time has come, although it has certainly not new, ancient wisdom. I think that one of the things we might do with this program is at least have a list that we can, a list of books that people can consult, and then encourage viewers to check out restorative justice online to see what else they might learn, because it certainly is very powerful. And I think we can all agree it is much needed at this time, I want to thank all of you. We haven't begun to explore what this topic entails, but I can see that it has great promise. So thank you very much for being with us. And I will also thank viewers for tuning in. And we hope to see you again next time on Conversations with Barbara. And thank you all for taking the time to share your ideas about this very powerful movement with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
You.
Thank you.
It's always good to see you.